Welcome, everyone, to a deep dive into some really unsettling truths, things that can lurk just beneath the surface of nature's, seemingly peaceful face. Today, we're stepping into the great outdoors, but maybe not just to admire the view. We've gathered some truly chilling firsthand accounts. These are personal experiences, and they reveal these, unexpected human dangers, dark mysteries hidden right where you least expect them. Our mission today is really to get into these stories, not just retell them, but to try and feel that dread, that uncertainty the narrators faced, and maybe pull out some surprising insights about how vulnerable we can be when faced with something unknown.
Absolutely. And what's really compelling, I think, is how these incidents, which seem so isolated, each one is terrifying on its own, but they start to weave together. They paint this broader picture of a hidden side to landscapes we usually think of as serene, as safe. It really forces you to reevaluate those deep assumptions we hold about, solitude and safety out in the wild.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our first story, we're calling it The Haunted Woods, A Brush with the Unseen. This account comes from someone who started as a self-described city boy. He wasn't initially keen on the outdoors, but then really found a deep love for it. He went from knowing basically nothing about camping to being, I think he called it, a borderline survivalist, really confident in his skills, but that confidence just got completely shattered. It happened during one really terrifying spring break trip. This was in a national forest in eastern Texas. So the unsettling part started almost immediately, the moment he gets to his campsite. As he's setting up, he just gets this feeling, an inexplicable, persistent sense of being watched. But there's no one there. He can't see anyone. The feeling was so strong, actually, that he cut his first hike short. He tried to brush it off, maybe just nerves. Had dinner, settled in. Then the next morning, the air is crisp, and initially, he's eager to explore again. He hits the trail. First few hours, quiet. But then, as he's taking a break, he catches this quick movement out of the corner of his eye in the distance. He sort of questions himself for a second, but then this really loud, ominous crow call just cuts through the silence. That confirmed it. He wasn't alone. He started wondering, why would someone be watching him? But the crow moved on, so he kept going. But maybe half an hour later, it starts again. This constant, distant shuffling sound in the leaves behind him. It was undeniable now. Whoever was following him wasn't even trying to be quiet anymore. And then something else, this strange smell. Unidentifiable, drifting from up ahead on the trail. He sniffs the air, trying to place it, and right then, the woods just go completely silent. Everything stopped. He knew something was profoundly wrong, but against all his instincts, curiosity, I guess, it got the better of him. He started walking towards that eerie smell. He only takes a few steps, and then, bam, a puff of dirt just explodes right beside him, instantly followed by the crack of gunfire. From behind him, the realization hits. He's being shot at. He hits the ground, he's frozen, yells out, "Hey!" or something. No reply, just silence. After a moment of just, terrifying silence, he tries to rationalize. Maybe the shooter made a mistake, thought he was game. But then that strange smell comes back, and again, against all reason, he starts moving toward it again. He takes maybe 5 steps, and another rapid series of shots comes, this time from that direction. Ahead of him, that was it. No more thinking. He just turned and ran, frantically, back the way he came, just praying he'd make it out alive. He heard 1 or 2 more shots ring out behind him as he fled, but honestly, he was too focused on escape to even register where they landed. He ran until he physically couldn't anymore, chugged some water, and then just kept going. This desperate flight back to his camp. Got there, didn't waste a second, abandoned his gear, his tent, everything. Just fled the national forest, desperate to get back to safety.
Wow. It's really chilling, isn't it? How that one encounter just fundamentally changed his whole view of the wild. And you have to wonder, what is that kind of unknown, hidden threat? What does it do to a person's psyche? It's not just the fear of being hunted, it's the complete redefinition of what wilderness danger even means.
Exactly.
This guy, the city boy, he trained for animal threats, maybe getting lost. Standard stuff. But his encounter points to something else entirely. A hidden, illicit human element. Like you mentioned, maybe those massive guarded pot fields people talk about. That possibility just fundamentally alters how you perceive the serenity of nature, doesn't it? It's a stark reminder that human activity, even illegal stuff, can turn a place you love, a sanctuary, into a genuinely hostile zone.
Right. And, despite his initial reluctance to call the police, his biggest fear was actually being ready to go back there. The further away he gained, the guiltier he felt. He realized, what if another camper just stumbled into that? He couldn't live with that thought. So about 20 miles away from the forest, he finally made a report. The officer apparently didn't seem too surprised, suggested the overzealous hunter theory.
Which is a common explanation, right?
Yeah.
Accidental shootings, someone mistaking him for game, or just incredibly reckless behavior.
Yeah, exactly. But for the narrator, it just didn't fit. If it was a hunter, surely the shooting would have stopped when he yelled out. That makes sense. The real chilling explanation, well, it came much later. Months had passed. He was starting to feel a bit normal again, and then he stumbled across this online post. The original poster had accidentally found what they called a mythical growing patch. Apparently, stories about these huge pot fields, guarded by cartel members, had been circulating for years. This person, they hadn't seen or heard anyone either, but the second they started backing away, gunfire just opened up all around them. Now, the narrator admitted the story sounded maybe a bit too convenient, but it planted a seed. He'd never even considered that possibility before. But it fit his terrifying encounter perfectly. And whether it was objectively true or not didn't really matter anymore. The longer he stayed away from the woods, the more real that explanation became in his mind. He's now accepted that his days in the woods are over. It's been 9 years. His life is kind of back to how it was before college, outwardly. But his perception, it's just the existence of these potential illicit operations has been seared into his mind. It poisoned the very essence of the forest he once loved so much. Okay, next up, we turn to an incredibly powerful and frankly disturbing experience. Screams in the night, a witness to horror. This account comes from 2017. A seasoned camper, someone confident in their skills, armed, who went on this long-awaited trip out west. Looking for freedom, solitude, he had absolutely no idea he was about to become this, unwilling witness to a complete nightmare. So he gets to his location, sets up camp. First day is quiet. The next afternoon, he finds this ideal spot and decides to do a bit of shooting practice. Target practice. He's about 200 yards from his camp, finds a dry creek bed, sets up some steel targets. Feeling pretty good, actually. But as he's reloading, he hears gunshots echoing through the hills. Not his. Curiosity gets him, so he starts to check out the source. But the shots keep going. It sounds like multiple guns. That made him nervous. Something just felt wrong about it. So he decided, you know what? Better head back to camp. He says it's a decision he both regrets and thanks himself for to this day. He finishes cleaning his guns back at camp, settles down pretty early, gets completely dark, then a noise wakes him up. He jolts upright, peeks out of his tent, sees nothing, figures, okay, maybe it was a dream, but just as he closes his eyes again, he hears it. And it's unmistakable. A blood-curdling scream echoing through the night. He described it as just the worst sound he'd ever learned in his life. The screams come again, but this time they're followed by a female voice, screaming for help, getting more and more desperate. Suddenly, things felt very, very real. He said he briefly, for a split second, considered grabbing his rifle and just running out there into the dark. The sounds were coming from the same direction as the gunshots earlier, but common sense took over. He stayed hidden in his tent. One more scream for help came through the night, and then just one single deafening gunshot, and then abrupt silence. The night just went completely still. He just lay there, frozen in terror, wondering what on earth he should do. Stayed like that until the sun finally rose the next morning. All those feelings he had of freedom, power, solitude, gone, replaced by the certainty that death was coming for him next. He packed his kit in what he says was record time, just got on his way back out, desperate to escape. The trip in had taken him a day and a half, just days before the trip out. He did it in less than a day. He described it as a miracle he even made it back, constantly looking over his shoulder, rifle grip tight, looking for imaginary pursuers. Finally reached his truck after dark, said he'd never been happier to be heading home.
So yeah, we've moved from that sort of hidden territorial threat in the first story to something much more direct, a brutal act of violence, heard but not seen. What strikes me here is the moral and psychological weight of a situation like that. It's immense. Knowing or strongly suspecting that a terrible event happened nearby, and then grappling with that agonizing guilt of not intervening, even when intervening might have been, incredibly dangerous, possibly fatal for him.
Right.
It really speaks to that complex clash, doesn't it, between our instinct for self-preservation and that innate human desire to help someone in distress. This story in particular really underscores how isolation, how being out there far from help, can potentially embolden people, allow them to commit acts that would be unthinkable closer to civilization. It's a fundamental shift in the kind of danger you might face in the wilderness compared to the first story.
Definitely. And, after the initial relief of getting away started to wear off, he said the guilt just slammed into him. As far as he could tell, he'd heard a woman in desperate need, potentially being murdered, and he'd done nothing. He said the entire drive back was just this war inside his head between his ego and common sense. One second, he's hating himself, calling himself a coward. The next, he's rationalizing, I was obviously outnumbered. What could I possibly have done? He says he still feels the sting of that bruised ego most strongly, even now. He debated reporting what he'd witnessed, but worried, would the cops even take him seriously? He had no concrete evidence, just sounds in the night. His perceived punishment, as he put it, was just this unending shame. For picking logic and reason over, what felt like basic human decency. It actually took some months before he found out the chilling, confirmed truth of what happened. He was too terrified to even look into it for a long time. But one day, he finally summoned the courage. And the reality was, a mixed bag, really. It turns out he had inadvertently camped about a mile away from an outlaw biker gang's hideout. They had abducted a female backpacker earlier that day. After horribly abusing her for several hours, they apparently set her free. She fled from their campsite that must have been the screams for help he heard, only for them to shoot her and leave her for dead. Now, most of the time, that's where a terrible story like this would end. But somehow, miraculously, this backpacker clung to life. She managed to make her way back to the highway and find help. The bikers, knowing they were caught, took plea deals. Most of them are serving essentially life sentences now. So while he is, of course, generally happy to hear the victims survive, the thought of the what-if still haunts him. He never told anyone about what he heard until sharing this account. And he says now, while many people believe it's best not to get involved, and he gets that desire to avoid conflict, he says that feeling pales in comparison to the guilt you'll carry if you don't act. He now firmly believes, we're all here on this earth together. And if you're able, you should try to help your fellow human beings when they're in need. Because, as he puts it, you might be the only thing standing between them living or dying. Powerful stuff. Okay, our next story. This one takes us back to a childhood sanctuary in the woods. A place of escape for a nervous kid just seeking some solitude. This account, The Ghost of the Past, a childhood encounter with lasting consequences, is actually still unfolding right now. For the narrator. This person, they described their childhood as unstable, found solace in the woods behind their house, made the secret spot among some cedar trees, their clubhouse, spent all their free time there alone, found this strange sense of safety they hadn't felt before. Then came the seemingly innocent discovery. One Sunday afternoon, he'd been camping out all weekend, was heading down a path towards a creek to get water. Across the creek, maybe 50 yards away, there's this almost deserted road, and that day he spots a parked camper van and two men walking in and out of it. They didn't seem to notice him at all. When he came back a few hours later, they were still there. But now they were drinking beers and just mindlessly reading guns into the woods. This made him furious. But then a stray bullet actually hit the water in the creek just feet away from him. And that was it. He'd had enough. He ran the mile back home, straight to the phone, called the sheriff. Now, he admits he made up a story, said he'd gotten lost, driven up on these men, and that they'd threatened him with their guns. He realizes now how wrong that was, fabricating it. But he was young, angry, and scared. The shocking validation, though, came really quickly. One morning, getting ready for school, he overhears a news report. A big meth lab bust. Acting on an anonymous tip, his sheriff's deputies found two men shooting guns on a country road. Upon investigation, the camper they were driving turned out to be a mobile meth lab. Both men taken into custody. He knew instantly it had to be because of his call. The seriousness of it scared him, but he felt confident, no one would ever know it was him. He even followed the case for the next year. Then came the insidious long-term terror. About 3 months before these guys were due for sentencing, he gets an anonymous letter in the mail. It just said, "You mess with the wrong people, kid." He described this jolt of ice-cold fear shooting through him. Any tiny doubt he had was just erased when another letter came the next week. Much clearer. This one said, "You better pray we get time served." He was too terrified to even wonder how on earth they found out it was him. Or found his address. The letters kept coming. Then the day of the sentencing hearing arrived. The news wasn't good for them. Both the men were already felons, had multiple firearms charges. The manufacturing charge alone carried a minimum of 10 years. The judge gave them 20 years each. The narrator was absolutely sure his days were numbered now. He actually stopped going to school for a while, spent all his time back in the woods. Not because he thought it would keep him safe, he wasn't that foolish, but he figured if he was going to die, he wanted to die somewhere he loved. But a strange thing happened. The death he expected. It never came. Month after month passed. He slowly became more confident. Maybe it was just an intimidation tactic, scaring the kid who called them in. life moved on. Flew by, actually. And for the last decade, those meth heads, as he called them, had been the furthest thing from his mind.
Wow, that's a terrifying escalation,
Yeah.
especially for a kid. And what's particularly chilling about an anonymous threat like that, especially after such a long delay initially, it creates this sort of pervasive, unseen threat, doesn't it? It's almost worse than a direct confrontation because you just don't know when or even if it will ever materialize. It's like psychological warfare, really.
Absolutely.
And this story really highlights the enduring nature of trauma and threat. The fact that a childhood act, something meant to protect himself and maybe the community, is resurfaced a whole decade later. It just shows how past decisions can echo, how they can impact your present, especially when you're dealing with dangerous individuals who hold grudges. The psychological burden, just knowing someone out there holds that kind of grudge against you for so long, must be immense.
And it brings us right to the terrifying present. Because just last week, he says, a new anonymous letter showed up at his apartment. Now, a decade later, it simply said, "You better write a will, the end is close at hand." He said he involuntarily just dropped it, like it burned him. His girlfriend was there, saw the whole thing, she picked up the letter, and he could tell she was concerned, obviously. But he just played it off, said it must be some kind of sick prank, refused to explain the real history. And just like that, this ghost from his past is back. He says he feels like he's constantly looking over his shoulder again. He's terrified now, not just for himself, but that these monsters might go after his girlfriend and their newborn child. Going to the cops was a brief thought, but realistically, without any proof of who sent it, he knows there's not much they can actually do legally. He concludes his account by saying, he's telling the story anonymously because there's not much else he can do other than warn everyone to be careful about the choices they make, even as a child, because the consequences can linger. He just asks for luck and maybe prayers for him and his family, as he lives in this constant agonizing dread, wondering if and when they might act on that threat. Okay, finally, we delve into a story that's really shrouded in suspicion. It questions that thin line between a tragic accident and something potentially far more sinister. It's titled The Unsettling Honeymoon, A Partner's Suspicious Death. This comes from a couple who were just out hiking at their local state park last year, and they innocently met some newlyweds on the trail. The narrator and his wife, Mandy, were hiking out to a lake, planning to spend the night. About halfway there, they stop for lunch, and they meet this other couple, newlyweds, on their honeymoon. The four of them have this really pleasant chat, discussing their plans, the trails. Mandy, who the narrator calls a hopeless romantic, apparently loved hearing all about their honeymoon story. They chatted for about 2 hours, then said their goodbyes. The narrator and Mandy get to the lake about an hour before dark, tired but happy, set up camp, turned in around 10 p.m. Next morning, they pack up, start their hike back. Around at 10 a.m., maybe 2 hours up the trail from the lake, they run into the husband from the couple they met the day before. But strangely, his wife isn't with him. Mandy asks about her, and the man says, she became ill the night before. She'd already returned home. But as he's saying it, he looks really nervous, couldn't look either of them in the eye, avoided eye contact. Before they could even ask anything else, he quickly adds, but she insisted I finish the trip alone. It sounded a bit odd, sure, but they had no real reason not to believe him at that point. Just then, another group of hikers comes up the trail, and the husband uses it as an excuse to leave, says goodbye quickly. The narrator wasn't interested in prying, figured it was none of his business. Mandy looked like she wanted to ask more, but he reminded her they had places to be, so she reluctantly agreed. They carry on, reach the parking lot not long after. They notice a few groups of people kind of talking amongst themselves as they pull out. See several more cars pulling in, including a park ranger's truck. But again, the narrator just thought, busy day. Didn't think much of it. It wasn't until breakfast the next morning that they heard the shocking news. The narrator grabbed coffee, flips on the TV, just in time to catch a local news report about a dead female camper found in the park. When they showed her face on the screen, he said he almost choked on his coffee. It was her, the woman they'd met just 2 days before. He yelled for Mandy to come look, needing confirmation. Then a wedding photo of the couple appears on screen. Mandy just gasped, grabbed the remote, turned the volume up. According to the husband's account to the police, the couple had been at this popular cliffside lookout point, watching the sunrise. He claimed that as they were getting ready to leave, his wife lost her footing, slipped, fell several hundred feet to her death. Now, it was certainly possible, it's a known hazard spot, but something really bothered the narrator. Why hadn't the husband mentioned any of this when they saw him on the trail, just hours after it supposedly happened? And more importantly, what was that whole story about her being ill and going home? It made no sense. The timing was off, the husband's demeanor, none of it added up. The narrator knew if something that horrific happened to Mandy, he'd be an absolute wreck. not calmly continuing his hike. Plus, they'd passed at least 15 other people on the trail that morning after seeing the husband, and not a single person mentioned anything. No buzz, no talk of an accident. It all just seemed fishy. He was glad to see Mandy agreed. Her instincts seemed to be screaming the same thing his were.
Yeah, this honeymoon story really highlights those subtle red flags, doesn't it? The ones that can easily get missed in the immediate aftermath of a tragedy. You've got conflicting stories from the husband, his remarkable composure, maybe too much composure, so soon after such an event, and then that odd lack of distress or even conversation among other hikers near where it happened. These little inconsistencies, they point towards a pattern that feels like more than just suspicion sometimes.
Exactly.
It's almost like a breakdown of typical human grief responses, which could be a crucial detail, often overlooked in initial assessments when everyone assumes tragic accident. It really raises that important question about the role of intuition, and pattern recognition, identifying potential foul play even when there's no smoking gun, no concrete evidence right away. Our guts often pick up on things that just don't logically fit.
Right. So after talking it over for a long time, they agreed they absolutely had to contact law enforcement. As far as the public knew, the husband wasn't under any suspicion at all. It was being treated as an accident. So the narrator called the sheriff's office, told them everything he and Mandy had observed, the inconsistencies, the husband's behavior. The deputy took the information, said someone might reach out to them in the future. But it's been almost a year now, and no one has ever contacted them. And that's why he decided to share the story. He's basically asking, what do you think? His instincts, his wife's instincts, they both tell them that a crime might have occurred here. But they admit they have no actual proof, no real justification beyond those inconsistencies and feelings. He wonders, surely if law enforcement thought they had something valuable, they would have called back by now. He doesn't want to be a nuisance. Doesn't want to cause trouble for a man who might genuinely be grieving, who by all other appearances seems like a decent person. But he just can't shake this nagging, persistent feeling that maybe, just maybe, a man is getting away with cold-blooded murder. So the question just hangs there for them. Should they keep pushing this somehow? Or just leave it entirely to the authorities and try to forget about it? Tough spot. These personal accounts, all of them, they really underscore a chilling truth, don't they? That the beauty, the tranquility we seek in the wilderness, sometimes it can be a deceptive veil, concealing human dangers, these dark histories, unsolved mysteries that can echo for years, sometimes decades, like in that third story. They remind us that the most terrifying encounters we might have out there aren't always with the wild itself, the bears, the storms, getting lost. Sometimes it's with the darkness that can exist within other people. So what does all this mean for you, listening? Do these stories change how you view maybe a quiet hiking trail or a secluded campsite you thought was perfectly safe? Do they make you question what might truly lie just beyond the visible path, beyond the trees? Perhaps the greatest unknown isn't the wilderness itself, but really the hidden depths of human intent, what someone else might be capable of. If these chilling tales send a shiver down your spine and you crave more true accounts of the strange and the terrifying, make sure you hit that like button. Share this deep dive with any fellow thrill seekers you know. And please subscribe to our channel, Horror Docx. We bring you the stories that haunt the shadows, so you never feel alone in your fear. Thank you so much for joining us on this pretty unsettling journey today. Until next time, please stay safe out there and keep your eyes peeled.